I need a husband today. Those were the first words Lily Carter said after knocking on her neighbor's door at sunrise. Ethan Brooks thought she was joking. She wasn't. By sunset, if Lily wasn't legally married, her late father's ranch would fall into the hands of a greedy relative who had already promised to sell every acre. She wasn't asking Ethan to love her. She was asking him to save her family's legacy. Ethan had only a few hours to decide. Would he marry the woman next door before time ran out? Early autumn settled gently over the rolling ranchlands of Wyoming. A cool breeze carried the scent of dry grass beneath a pale golden sunrise, while distant cattle moved quietly across fields still damp with morning dew. Ethan Brooks tightened the last rusted bolt on the side of his old tractor and wiped the grease from his hands with a faded blue shop rag. At 29 years old, he had the broad shoulders and powerful frame of a man who had spent his entire life lifting hay bales, repairing broken fences, and working beneath an unforgiving sun. His square jaw was covered with a short, neatly trimmed dark beard that softened otherwise rugged features. Thick brown hair curled slightly beneath the brim of his worn work cap, and calm gray-blue eyes carried a quiet sadness that most people never noticed. Around town, Ethan was known as the dependable neighbor who never refused to help anyone, yet few understood how much loneliness had settled inside him after losing both of his parents in a highway accident 6 years earlier. Since then, the old Brooks Ranch had become both his responsibility and his refuge. He rarely left it except to buy feed or attend church on Sundays, convincing himself that hard work was easier than facing an empty house every evening. The engine sputtered once before finally falling silent. Then he heard hurried footsteps. He looked toward the gravel lane separating his ranch from the neighboring Carter property. A young woman was running toward him. Her breathing was uneven, her boots were coated with dried dust, and loose strands of chestnut hair escaped from an untidy braid that had clearly been tied in haste. Although exhaustion showed across her face, she still carried a quiet grace that years of ranch life had never erased. Lily Carter stopped a few feet away, struggling to catch her breath. She was 25, slender but stronger than she looked after years of helping her father during calving season. Her warm hazel eyes were usually filled with optimism, yet today they were swollen from crying through the night. Freckles dusted the bridge of her nose beneath sun-kissed skin, and despite the fear trembling across her face, there remained a stubborn determination that had always defined her. Everyone in the county knew Lily as the gentle daughter of Daniel Carter, a respected cattle rancher whose honesty had earned more trust than wealth. Unlike many young people her age, she had chosen to stay home instead of building a career in the city because she believed her family's ranch deserved another generation. Ethan frowned. "Lily, what happened?" She opened her mouth, closed it again, then looked directly into his eyes. "I need a husband today." The words hung in the cool morning air. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at her. He honestly wondered whether exhaustion had made him hear something impossible. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "What did you just say?" "I need a husband today." There was no hesitation this time, only desperation. Ethan searched her face, waiting for the smile that never came. She wasn't joking. Without another word, Lily reached into the worn leather satchel hanging across her shoulder and removed a cream-colored envelope stamped with the seal of a law office in Sheridan. "My father's attorney gave me this an hour ago." Her voice cracked. "My dad passed away last night." The sentence struck Ethan harder than he expected. Daniel Carter, a man with silver hair, weathered hands, and a laugh that carried across open pastures. The man who had taught Ethan how to repair a broken cattle chute when he was 15. The man who had quietly delivered groceries after Ethan's parents died without ever expecting thanks. Ethan whispered. "I didn't know." No one did. His heart gave out after midnight. She lowered her eyes. "I barely had time to say goodbye." Silence settled between them. Only the wind stirred through the prairie grass. Finally, Lily unfolded several legal documents. "My father signed a family agreement years ago." Ethan accepted the papers. Most of the legal language meant little to him, but one paragraph had been highlighted in yellow. If Lily Carter remained unmarried by 5 o'clock on the day following Daniel Carter's passing, temporary operational control of Carter Ranch would immediately transfer to Victor Carter for 6 months. Ethan looked up slowly. "Victor?" Lily nodded. "My cousin." She spoke his name as though it physically hurt. "He's already waiting." Ethan knew Victor Carter by reputation. 38 years old. Always dressed better than the people around him. Tall and lean with slick black hair, expensive boots that had never stepped into deep mud, and a polished smile that disappeared the moment money entered a conversation. Victor rarely visited the ranch while Daniel was alive, yet he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that Carter Ranch occupied some of the most valuable land in the county. Rumors had followed him for years: quiet meetings with developers, conversations about luxury cabins, promises of easy profits. No one could prove anything, but almost everyone distrusted him. "What happens after 6 months?" Ethan asked quietly. Lily looked toward her family's distant red barn. "He'll sell everything. The breeding herd, the equipment, the land, everything my father spent 40 years building." Her voice finally broke. "I can't let that happen." Ethan looked across the fence separating their ranches. He remembered climbing those fences with Lily when they were children. He remembered Daniel waving them inside for lemonade after long summer afternoons. None of those memories seemed old until this morning. "So," Ethan said softly, "you came to me." She nodded. "I don't have anyone else I trust." The honesty in her answer carried more weight than tears ever could. Ethan felt something tighten inside his chest. Marriage wasn't paperwork. It wasn't a shortcut. It was a promise. Yet standing before him wasn't a woman searching for romance. She was a daughter trying to protect the last piece of her father's life. Minutes passed without either of them speaking. Finally, Ethan folded the papers carefully and handed them back. "If I become your husband today," he said slowly, "then every decision about protecting your ranch will be yours." Lily blinked. "I won't speak for you. I won't fight your battles unless you ask. I'll stand beside you. But this has to become your ranch, not mine." A tear rolled down her cheek before she nodded. "I understand." Ethan looked once more toward the Carter Ranch, standing quietly beneath the autumn sky. Then he took a slow breath. "All right, we'll go to the courthouse." Lily closed her eyes in relief, knowing that before the sun set, both of their lives would change forever. The courthouse in Sheridan stood quietly beneath a bright autumn sky, its old brick walls carrying the weight of countless promises made over generations. Outside, pickup trucks lined the street while yellow cottonwood leaves drifted across the sidewalk as if the world had decided this ordinary Tuesday deserved no special attention. Inside, everything happened far faster than either Ethan or Lily had imagined. A county clerk guided them through a stack of papers without asking unnecessary questions. Her name was Margaret Collins, a woman in her early 60s with neatly styled silver hair, warm brown eyes, and gentle wrinkles earned from decades of greeting nervous couples inside the same building. She had watched joyful weddings, painful divorces, and everything in between. Looking at Ethan and Lily, she sensed immediately that this was neither romance nor convenience. It was desperation wearing borrowed courage. "You'll both need to sign here," she said softly. Lily's hand trembled as she held the pen. Ethan noticed. Without thinking, he slid the marriage certificate a little closer so she wouldn't have to stretch across the desk. She looked up. "Thank you." He simply nodded. A few minutes later, an elderly county judge read the required words with calm professionalism. There were no flowers decorating the room, no music, no smiling relatives holding cameras. Ethan wore the same denim shirt he had repaired the tractor in earlier that morning. Lily still wore dusty ranch boots beneath the simple blue dress she had hurriedly changed into before leaving home. When the judge announced them husband and wife, neither of them smiled. Both understood that nothing inside their hearts had changed yet. Only their responsibilities had. As they stepped outside, Lily stared down at the plain silver marriage certificate folded carefully inside her folder. "It doesn't feel real," she whispered. "It probably won't for a while," Ethan answered. The drive back toward Carter Ranch took nearly 40 minutes. Neither spoke much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply too full. Every mile carried them closer to problems neither had solved. When they reached the main road leading into town, Ethan noticed people turning their heads. A ranch supply truck slowed beside them. The driver waved awkwardly before driving on. Someone had already heard. By the time they stopped at Miller Feed and Supply to pick up mineral blocks for Ethan's cattle, the news had spread through nearly the entire county. The first person to greet them was Martha Dawson. Martha, 54 years old, managed the feed store her late husband had built 30 years earlier. She was short and broad-shouldered with curly gray hair tucked beneath a red baseball cap, kind green eyes, and strong hands roughened by lifting feed bags instead of hiding behind an office desk. She loved her community, but like many people in small towns, she collected stories almost as quickly as she sold livestock supplies. She looked from Ethan to Lily, then to the marriage certificate still visible inside Lily's folder. "Well," Martha finally said, raising one eyebrow. "That's the fastest courtship I've ever seen." Several customers nearby pretended to examine fencing tools while quietly listening. Lily's cheeks turned crimson. Ethan calmly placed 2 bags of mineral supplements on the counter. "We're here for feed." Martha smiled knowingly. "So I noticed." Her words were harmless, but whispers had already begun drifting through the aisles. "They say Daniel's ranch is worth millions. I heard Ethan finally got lucky. Maybe that's why he never married before." Lily heard every sentence. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor until they reached the parking lot. The moment Ethan loaded the truck, she folded her arms tightly across her chest. "They think I bought myself a husband." "They don't know the truth," Ethan replied. "They don't care about the truth." He closed the tailgate quietly. Most people prefer stories that fit inside one conversation. She looked away toward the distant mountains. "I hate this." "I know. But if protecting your father's ranch were easy," Ethan said, "he wouldn't have spent his life protecting it." She breathed slowly before climbing back into the truck. When they reached Carter Ranch, another pickup was already waiting. Black, shiny, expensive. Victor Carter leaned comfortably against the driver's door. He smiled before they even stepped out. "I was wondering how long the honeymoon would last." Lily walked forward. "There wasn't one." "I can see that." Victor's eyes shifted toward Ethan. "So congratulations. I suppose becoming the owner of half a ranch overnight feels pretty rewarding." Ethan remained perfectly still. "I didn't marry land." Victor laughed. "No." He stepped closer. "Funny, because that's exactly what everyone in town believes." Before Ethan could answer, 3 ranch hands emerged from the equipment barn. Every pair of eyes moved toward Lily. Not Victor. Not Ethan. Her. She realized this was the first moment they would decide whether she truly belonged there. Lily's heartbeat pounded inside her chest. She wanted Ethan to answer. Instead, he quietly stepped half a pace behind her. She understood immediately. This was her ranch. If she wanted people to follow her, she had to be the first one willing to stand. Taking one steady breath, Lily faced every worker gathered in the yard. "My father built this ranch with honest hands," she said. "I intend to honor that work." She paused before speaking the words she had repeated inside her mind all morning. "From today forward, this ranch is not for sale." Silence settled across the yard. No applause. No cheering. Only wind moving through the pasture grass. But not one worker walked away. For Lily, that was enough. The first week of October arrived with crisp mornings, bright blue skies, and long shadows stretching across the Wyoming prairie. Frost shimmered over the pasture before the rising sun slowly warmed the fields, promising another demanding day on the Carter Ranch. Lily Carter Harper stood alone inside her father's old ranch office, surrounded by ledgers that seemed to weigh more than the wooden shelves holding them. Dust floated through the morning light pouring across the worn desk where Daniel Carter had spent decades balancing expenses, planning breeding seasons, and recording every calf born on the ranch. Lily ran her fingertips across the faded handwriting, recognizing her father's careful script, but realizing how little she truly understood about the business behind the life she had always loved. She had grown up feeding calves and mending fences beside him, yet he had quietly carried every financial decision himself, hoping she could simply enjoy the ranch while he carried its burdens. Ethan entered the office carrying 2 mugs of coffee before sunrise. "You've been here since 5, haven't you?" he asked. Lily managed a tired smile. "I thought reading these books would make everything clearer." "Did it?" She looked at the stack of ledgers. "It only convinced me that my father was smarter than I ever realized." Ethan laughed softly. He wasn't born knowing any of this. She looked at him. He learned. The single word settled deep inside her thoughts. Instead of sitting behind the desk himself, Ethan pulled another chair beside hers. "I'm not going to run this ranch for you," he said. "I know, but I'll show you how to find your own answers." For the next several hours, he never once reached for the calculator or wrote numbers into the ledger himself. Instead, he asked questions. What happens if hay prices rise? Which supplier gave your father 30-day payment terms? Why do you think he always sold calves in late October instead of September? Each question forced Lily to search through records instead of relying on him. By lunchtime, she had answered every one. Not perfectly, but honestly. The following morning, Ethan drove her across the eastern pasture where nearly 200 black Angus cattle grazed peacefully beneath the autumn sun. Most people think cattle only need grass, Ethan said. They're wrong. He showed her patches where the grass had been eaten too short and explained how rotating grazing areas protected both the animals and the land. He pointed toward a small creek winding across the property and explained why fresh water mattered as much as good feed. Rather than giving orders, he constantly asked Lily what she noticed first. Little by little, she began seeing details she had ignored for years. A broken fence post. A mineral feeder standing nearly empty. Fresh hoof prints showing where several cows had crossed into another pasture. She realized ranching wasn't about reacting to problems. It was about noticing them before they became expensive. 2 days later, they met with a livestock buyer named Owen Pierce. Owen was a sturdy 50-year-old cattle broker with weathered skin, thick sandy hair turning gray around the temples, and a heavy mustache that almost hid his constant smile. Having spent 3 decades buying cattle throughout Wyoming, he respected honesty more than clever negotiation. Daniel Carter had earned that respect years earlier by never hiding the quality of his livestock. As Owen walked through the calf pens, he glanced toward Ethan. "So what's your price?" Ethan folded his arms. "You'll have to ask Lily." Owen looked surprised. "So she's making the decisions now?" "She is." Lily's heartbeat quickened. She remembered every note her father had written beside previous sales. She remembered Ethan's questions. She took a slow breath. "The average weight is higher this season," she said confidently. "And every calf has complete vaccination records." She named a price. Owen scratched his chin before smiling. "Your father would have started with exactly the same number." Relief flooded through her. After several minutes of discussion, they shook hands. It was the first cattle agreement Lily had negotiated entirely on her own. News traveled quickly. The following afternoon, ranch foreman Carl Jenkins approached while several workers repaired fencing along the north pasture. Carl was 61 years old, broad-chested with a weather-beaten face, silver stubble covering his jaw, and hands scarred from 40 years of ranch work. He had worked beside Daniel Carter longer than Lily had been alive and rarely trusted change until someone earned it through action rather than words. Removing his gloves, Carl walked directly toward Lily instead of Ethan. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "the north gate needs replacing before winter. What do you want us to use? Steel or treated cedar?" Lily noticed something immediately. Carl hadn't looked at Ethan once. She studied the repair costs in her notebook before answering. "Treated cedar. It'll last longer, and we'll save money repairing it ourselves." Carl nodded once. "That's what your father would have chosen." He turned back toward the crew without another question. Lily watched him leave before quietly looking at Ethan. "You didn't tell him to ask me." "No. You told everyone you weren't running this place." He smiled. "They're finally starting to believe it." That evening, the sun disappeared behind the mountains, bathing the Carter Ranch in warm shades of gold and amber. Lily stood outside the old red barn listening to cattle settle for the night. For the first time since her father's death, the ranch no longer felt like an impossible burden resting on her shoulders. Instead, it felt like a gift he had spent his entire life preparing her to receive, even if neither of them had realized it until now. A dry wind swept across the Wyoming plains as another unusually hot day faded into a crimson sunset. The grass had turned pale from weeks without meaningful rain, and every rancher in the county watched the sky with quiet concern, hoping for clouds that never seemed to come. Lily Carter Harper had just finished reviewing feed invoices when Carl Jenkins hurried into the ranch office without knocking. His weathered face, usually calm after decades of ranch work, looked unusually tense. "Ma'am," he said, slightly out of breath, "the main water pump isn't working." Lily immediately stood. "The cattle troughs. They'll be empty before morning." Within minutes, she and Ethan were driving toward the pump station near the south pasture. When they arrived, water no longer flowed through the underground pipes feeding nearly every watering trough across the ranch. Ethan knelt beside the broken control box, shining his flashlight across twisted electrical wires. This wasn't normal wear, he said quietly. Lily looked closer. Several wires had been cut cleanly. Someone had done it on purpose. Her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. If we don't restore water tonight, the herd will suffer tomorrow, Ethan finished. Before either of them could begin repairs, another pair of headlights appeared along the ranch road. Victor Carter stepped from his polished black pickup wearing an expensive leather jacket untouched by dust. His dark hair remained perfectly combed despite the evening wind, and his confident smile revealed the satisfaction of a man who believed events were unfolding exactly as planned. He slowly looked at the silent pump. What unfortunate timing. Lily folded her arms. What do you want, Victor? He sighed dramatically. I'm here to help. He pulled a folder from his truck. I've already prepared a purchase agreement. You sign tonight, and I'll cover every repair, every debt, every problem this ranch has. Lily stared at the papers without touching them. My answer hasn't changed. Victor smiled again. You'll lose the cattle before the week ends. Maybe, Lily replied steadily. But I won't lose my father's ranch by handing it to you. For the first time, Victor's smile faded. Without another word, he returned to his truck and drove away into the darkness. Ethan watched the disappearing taillights. He expected you to panic. I almost did. But you didn't. She took a deep breath. Let's fix it. Carl soon returned with several ranch hands carrying spare pipe fittings, electrical tools, and portable work lights. No one complained about the late hour. They simply started working. Ethan repaired damaged wiring while explaining each step to Lily instead of asking her to stand aside. She held the flashlight, checked equipment lists, and organized replacement parts as Carl coordinated the crew digging around the damaged pipeline. Hour after hour passed. Hands became blistered. Boots disappeared beneath mud. Shirts were soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. Near 3 o'clock in the morning, a cheerful bark echoed across the pasture. A young border collie named Scout raced toward the crew carrying a work glove someone had dropped earlier. Barely 2 years old, Scout had a black and white coat, bright, intelligent brown eyes, and endless energy. Daniel Carter had trained him to help gather cattle, and since Daniel's passing, the loyal dog had refused to leave the ranch, following Lily everywhere as though still protecting his old master's family. His playful determination briefly lifted everyone's spirits. Finally, Ethan tightened the last connection. Try it. Lily reached for the switch. For one silent second, nothing happened. Then the pump roared back to life. A deep rush echoed through the pipes before fresh water poured into the nearest trough. Cheers broke out across the yard. Carl removed his hat and smiled proudly. You did it, ma'am. Not Miss Lily. Not Daniel's daughter. Just one simple title. Ma'am. Lily felt tears fill her eyes as she watched the cattle gather peacefully around the flowing water. For the first time, she realized these people no longer stayed because of her father's memory. They stayed because they believed in her. As dawn painted the eastern horizon gold, Ethan stood quietly beside her. He had once agreed to this marriage because he respected Daniel Carter. Now, watching Lily refuse fear, refuse greed, and refuse to surrender, he understood something had changed inside his own heart. If he remained beside her after this night, it would no longer be because of a promise. It would be because she had quietly become the person he never wanted to lose. 6 months later, spring returned to the Wyoming prairie with endless blue skies, green pastures, and newborn calves scattered across the rolling hills. Gentle winds carried the scent of fresh grass through Carter Ranch, where every fence stood repaired, every pasture had recovered from winter, and the land once again reflected the quiet pride of those who cared for it. Lily Carter Harper walked slowly across the ranch yard before sunrise, pausing beside the weathered oak tree where her father had often stood watching the cattle return each evening. She looked different now. The uncertainty that had filled her hazel eyes on the morning she asked Ethan to marry her had been replaced by calm confidence. Ranch work had strengthened her posture. The Wyoming sun had left a deeper golden warmth across her skin, and her chestnut hair, tied neatly beneath a work hat, framed a face that no longer searched for permission before making decisions. She still missed Daniel Carter every day, but grief no longer controlled her. Instead, it quietly reminded her why she refused to give up. Inside the ranch office, Attorney Benjamin Holloway waited beside the large wooden desk. Benjamin was a 65-year-old estate lawyer with neatly combed white hair, thin wire-rimmed glasses, and a dignified manner shaped by 4 decades of practicing law. He spoke slowly, choosing every word with care because he understood that legal documents often carried the weight of people's lives. Daniel Carter had trusted him for many years, not because he was the smartest lawyer in Wyoming, but because he never allowed money to influence his judgment. Benjamin adjusted his glasses before placing several signed documents onto the desk. "Mrs. Harper," he said with a gentle smile, "I am pleased to officially confirm that you have fulfilled every operational condition required by your father's estate." Lily held her breath. "The Carter Ranch is now entirely under your ownership." For several quiet seconds, she simply stared at the papers. She remembered the frightened woman who had run across the pasture 6 months earlier, believing she was about to lose everything. Now she understood that what she had truly found was herself. Benjamin handed her the final deed. "Your father would have been proud." Lily smiled through tears. "I hope so." When the lawyer left, Ethan was waiting outside beside the old red barn, repairing a loose gate hinge while Scout rested nearby in the grass, lazily wagging his tail. Ethan looked much the same as before, his broad shoulders still carrying the strength earned through years of honest labor, his short beard touched by the afternoon sunlight, his quiet gray-blue eyes watching the ranch with peaceful satisfaction. Yet something inside him had changed. The loneliness that had followed him since losing his parents no longer seemed to weigh upon every movement. That evening they returned to Ethan's farmhouse, where the kitchen table had witnessed every difficult conversation since the day Lily first arrived asking for help. Without saying a word, Lily placed their marriage certificate between them. She gently smoothed the folded paper. "Our agreement is finished," she said softly. Ethan remained silent. "You kept every promise you made." She looked into his eyes with gratitude rather than sadness. "You don't have to stay married to me anymore." The room became very quiet. Outside, cattle drifted peacefully toward the barns as the setting sun covered both neighboring ranches with golden light. Ethan looked through the kitchen window before answering. "The day you knocked on my door." He smiled faintly. "I thought I was helping someone survive one impossible day." Lily listened without speaking. "I believed I was protecting your father's ranch." He turned toward her. "But somewhere between repairing fences, balancing ledgers, chasing cattle, and watching you become the woman your father always believed you could be." He paused. "I stopped staying because of a promise. I stayed because I couldn't imagine my life without you." Tears quietly rolled down Lily's cheeks. "You mean that?" "I've never been more certain of anything." She laughed through those tears, remembering the frightened words she had spoken months ago. "I needed a husband today." Ethan reached across the table and gently held her hand. "And I spent 6 months discovering I wanted to be your husband for the rest of my life." She squeezed his hand. Neither of them noticed Scout quietly resting his head across Ethan's boots as though he understood that the family Daniel Carter had hoped to protect was finally complete. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the Wyoming hills, Ethan and Lily stepped onto the farmhouse porch together. Before them, the Carter Ranch and the Brooks Ranch stretched across the valley without fences dividing their hearts anymore. Cattle wandered peacefully through the fresh spring grass. The evening breeze carried laughter instead of worry, and for the first time neither of them saw 2 neighboring properties. They saw one home, and one future they would build together. Before we say goodbye, let's remember something this story quietly teaches us. Lily believed she needed a husband to save her father's ranch. But perhaps God was doing something much greater. God wasn't only protecting a piece of land. He was healing 2 lonely hearts that had been carrying heavy burdens for years. Sometimes we pray for miracles and expect them to arrive in dramatic ways. But many of God's greatest miracles come disguised as ordinary moments. A knock on the door, a stranger willing to help, a difficult season that teaches us courage, or a person placed in our path exactly when we need them most. The Bible reminds us in Romans 8:28 that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. That doesn't mean life will always be easy. It means that even our hardest days are never beyond God's ability to transform into something beautiful. Perhaps you're facing your own impossible situation today. Maybe you're carrying grief, financial struggles, family problems, or simply wondering if anyone truly sees your pain. Please don't lose hope. The same God who guided Lily one desperate morning is still working in the lives of ordinary people today. Sometimes his answer doesn't arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it begins with one small step of faith, one act of kindness, one person willing to stand beside us. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below and tell us. What blessing has God brought into your life when you least expected it? Your story may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss more inspiring stories of faith, hope, love, and second chances. And if you're comfortable doing so, let us pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you for reminding us that your plans are always greater than our fears. Please bless every person watching this video today. Bring peace to the anxious, strength to the weary, healing to the brokenhearted, and hope to those who feel alone. Open doors that no one can close. Surround every family with your love and guide each step they take. May your grace fill every home with comfort, joy, and unwavering faith. In Jesus' name, amen. May God bless you and your family always. We'll see you in the next story.